The first step to writing character emotions is to remember that not every character is equally conscious of the way that they are feeling, and often characters will not want to admit to themselves or others that they are feeling a certain way. So if you write, a wave of anger rushed through her, for example, if it's written from her perspective, then that assumes that she's self aware enough to know how she's feeling, label it, and admit at the very least to herself that she is feeling that way. And you can write very self aware characters who are able to immediately recognize and label the way that they are feeling without attempting to convince themselves or others that they aren't feeling that way. But really, that's not most people. So you don't just have to keep in mind how you know the character is feeling and how other people will perceive the character is feeling, but also how the character wants to feel in that situation and to what extent the character sort of convinces themselves and pretends to others that they feel the way that they want to feel rather than the way they truly feel. People who are angry will say to others and to themselves, I'm not angry, I'm just this or this or this, I want this to be done right, and call it something else, even if really they're just pissed. So it's important to keep in mind, not everybody is perfectly honest with themselves. Not every character sees themselves with the omniscient eye of the author that sees into the deepest, darkest recesses of their souls and knows exactly how they feel in any moment. Most people are not that self-aware. So remember that the character does not see themselves from your perspective. They can only see themselves from their own perspective, which usually distorts things. Everybody is culpable of wishful thinking when it comes to things that they've done or thought or felt. The second step for writing character emotions is to remember what context the character is in and what their goals are. A character's goal is never going to be, I'm going to express very clearly how I'm feeling, not how I think I'm feeling, not how I want to be feeling, how I'm feeling, so that the reader out there will know exactly how I am feeling and that a wave of anger is rushing through me or that I feel sad now. I'm going to explicitly state it and be very obvious about it so that the reader will know. That's never a character's goal. Characters come into any scene, at least if they're reasonably proactive, which most characters that are interesting are, with some sort of goal. In any interaction, there's something they want to do. They want to make up with their long lost friend. They want to settle a dispute. They want this, they want that. And often, emotions pop up in the way, usually they're at least separate from the goal, and very often they're a hindrance to the goal that needs to be overcome. So somebody who is angry, but their goal is to settle the fight and come to an agreement, is going to act very differently than somebody whose goal is to prove themselves right and make the other person agree with them by whatever means necessary. And different characters will be more or less able to look past their emotions in order to achieve their goal. Some people will get completely wrapped up in their emotions and lose sight of the goal. And they will generally end up expressing their emotions more directly. But a character's goal is sometimes their goal is to tell another character how they're feeling. Even then, they probably won't be perfectly 100% self-aware about it, but that might be their goal. But no character's goal is to express their deepest emotions to the reader, because, well, the character doesn't know the reader exists. To the character, the reader does not exist. To the character, what is happening then is actually happening to them. not something that you as the author or a reader is watching and trying to understand. So they have no reason to make it more understandable for the reader. And context will often affect goals. For example, if somebody's goal is to make a deal with some big, businessman. They're trying to make a deal with some big businessman, but the businessman's a complete prick. And the character is getting very pissed off. The character will probably use more pissed off mannerisms and speak in like a harsher way, because they can't help it. They're just ticked off. And most of this will be subconscious. The character probably won't even realize that they're acting this way now. But they're not just going to get up on top of the table and start screaming. Because their goal is not to show to everyone around them and to the reader, I am angry. Their goal is to hide their anger as much as possible, which isn't 100% possible, but hide it as much as they can because they want the deal to happen, and in the context that they're in, the deal cannot happen if they express their anger too strongly because the other person will get up and leave. So in short, remember that characters' goals are usually something else that is either at least not helped usually or very often hindered by their emotions rather than specifically to express their emotions. The third tip for writing character emotions is to, generally as much as you can, avoid stating directly he felt angry, sad, felt a pang of longing. I've seen that in plenty of romance novels. Romance novels are guilty of speaking very specifically about different feelings very, very often. And the reason why this should generally be limited as much as possible is because, as a reader, it's very hard to get a sense of an emotion from just reading, he was angry. Reading, he was angry doesn't actually make you feel the sensation of an angry person, if you know what I mean. Writing about him, like he growled, he hissed. I use that a lot. Not literally like a snake, but you know what I mean. Somebody speaking in a short, clipped, aggressive way, like very choppy motions, getting in people's faces. That will, the reader will know either way that the person is angry, but you can feel that the person is angry much more strongly and understand how they are angry and why they are angry and empathize with their anger much more in the second version than if you just say, he was angry. Because so rarely in real life is it ever labeled like that, Maybe people might say after the fact, dang, he was angry. But especially in the moment, people are very bad at labeling and admitting to themselves the way that they are feeling. And even if they are self-aware, it's usually, readers kind of want to work for their meal a little bit. A reader feels smart if they intuit from how a character is acting that they're angry, even if they're very obviously angry. It gets that little thing like, oh, I figured it out. Even if the reader isn't directly, specifically thinking that to themselves, it feels better than if you're just told, this is an angry person. It almost feels if they just tell you every single feeling directly, it's kind of almost not respecting the reader's intelligence in a way. Because, this guy's screaming and throwing things, and then it's like, he felt really angry. What? I could never have guessed that. So, not only is it insulting to the reader's intelligence generally, but it's very hard to get an actual feel for the way the character is feeling and understand the exact nuances of how they are feeling when you just state the emotion directly. Because saying angry is a very broad category. Angry could mean furious, or annoyed, or cross, or even just when you're confused but you're kind of annoyed that you're confused and the person's not giving you the answer and you're like angry, inquisitive. There's so many different ways to be angry that all are expressed by different mannerisms, different actions, different words, and each different character with each different of the thousands and thousands of different ways that a person can be angry will act angry differently. So just expressing the anger through actions and dialogue will allow the reader to understand on a deeper level exactly how the character is angry. But when you say he's angry, it puts it in a very wide box. It makes it too basic and straightforward and vague. And basic and straightforward is just not how really human emotions work at all in real life. Side note, I'm using angry as an example a lot here. All of this advice works for any emotion. The fourth tip for writing character emotions is to remember that not every character will fully process every feeling in the moment. A good example of this is a story that I have started and I'm going to finish probably at some point, I hope. I hope to make it into a novel. But the main character is very calm and cool and collected, even in very dangerous, life-threatening situations. And he just doesn't feel anything. And then the moment he's out of the situation, he realizes, I'm safe. He's hit by extreme waves of fear and anxiety and usually pukes his guts out and hyperventilates on the floor. That's like a coping mechanism he developed. Probably not psychologically very realistic, but it's a fantasy novel. I really don't give a crap. Psychological realism is something that generally is important in writing. But it's plausible enough that, but it is similar to something that is very real in human beings. That you might feel one way about something in the moment, and then sit and think about it later, and maybe realize things later that make you feel a completely different way about it. Somebody might compartmentalize, like the character I'm writing, in very stressful situations, and then break down afterward. Or they might act a certain way. Maybe they might act like a petulant brat and be kind of immature in their response, and either realize fully later that they were in the wrong and admit that, or if they're still kind of immature, then justify it to themselves. Although often a good writer will be able to show a character justifying something to themselves in a way that makes it obvious without explicitly stating it to the reader that they kind of know that they're bullshitting themselves, but they're not willing to admit that that's what they're doing. So remember that not every character will fully process everything in the moment and come to every single realization that they will ever come to something right in that moment. Emotions evolve over time. People stew a lot. I've done it. You've done it. We've all refused to admit to ourselves that we were in the wrong at least once. It's pretty human.